I want to start by telling you something I've never said out loud to anyone. Not to my mother, not to my therapist, not to the detective who eventually sat across from me in a gray room with a paper cup of coffee and a recorder on the table between us. I want to say it here to you because I think some of you will understand it in a way the people in my life couldn't. My brother is the best performer I have ever seen. Not in the theatrical sense. Not the kind of performer who memorizes lines and rehearses under stage lights. I mean the deeper kind. The kind that doesn't perform for applause. The kind that performs because it's the only way they know how to exist in the world. The kind where you watch them cry at a funeral and something in your chest gets very, very cold because what you're seeing isn't grief. It's practice. I need you to sit with that for a second before I continue, because everything I'm about to tell you is going to hinge on that moment. That cold, quiet moment when I stood at my sister Celeste's graveside and watched my brother Daniel cry. And instead of feeling sadness for him, I felt the same thing I used to feel as a kid when the power went out in the middle of the night. Fear, not of the dark. Fear of what might be moving in it. My name is Renata. I'm 41 years old. I'm a middle school art teacher in the same town where I grew up, which means I never really left, and I've spent a lot of years wondering what that says about me. I have a small house with a blue door that I painted myself. I have a cat named Whistler, after the painter. I have a good life, genuinely good, the kind that took me a long time to build and even longer to let myself keep. I also have a brother named Daniel, who is 45. And I had a sister named Celeste, who was 38 when she died. Celeste. Even saying her name does something to my breathing. She was the kind of person who made rooms feel different when she walked into them. Not louder, warmer. She had this particular laugh that started low and then kind of surprised her halfway through, like she forgot she was going to enjoy something that much. She worked as a pediatric occupational therapist, which was the most Celeste job imaginable because she had an instinct for finding what was broken in something and meeting it exactly where it was. She understood kids who couldn't explain what was wrong with them. She was also the person who understood me. That matters to what I'm about to tell you more than almost anything else. Our family looked fine from the outside. I want to be specific about that word. Fine. Not happy, not close, not warm. Fine. We had the things that look like a family from a distance. Holidays, Sunday dinners occasionally. A group text chat that nobody really used except to send each other news articles and the occasional photo. My parents, Gerald and Patricia, were still married after 47 years, which everyone in town seemed to regard as an achievement. They had a nice house in the same neighborhood they'd always lived in. They went to church. They paid their bills. From the outside, fine. What you didn't see from the outside was the architecture of the thing, the actual structure underneath the appearance. Daniel was the oldest. Gerald and Patricia had Daniel, and then 5 years later they had me, and then 2 years after that they had Celeste. And in that gap, in that 5 years before I came along, something happened between my parents and my brother that I don't have a name for. Some kind of investment, some kind of story they told themselves about who he was going to be. Because by the time I was old enough to understand things, it was already clear that Daniel existed on a different floor of the family than Celeste, and I did. He was consulted. We were informed. His opinions about family decisions were solicited. Ours were tolerated. When Daniel got into trouble, which he did more often than anyone acknowledged, it was handled quietly and gently, the way you handle something fragile. When Celeste and I got into trouble, even minor trouble, it was treated as a reflection of our character. I remember being 15 and coming home 30 minutes past curfew because the bus broke down and I had no way to call ahead. This was before cell phones were common, and my father sat me down at the kitchen table and told me that I needed to think carefully about the kind of person I was choosing to become. That same year, Daniel wrecked our father's car and came home drunk at 2 in the morning. The car was repaired. The conversation was private. It was never mentioned again. I'm not telling you this to build a case for how unfair my childhood was. I'm telling you this because you need to understand the terrain. You need to understand what the land looked like before the thing happened that I'm going to tell you about. Because when something catastrophic happens inside a family, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a context. And the context here was 40 years deep before Celeste ever got sick. Celeste got diagnosed 2 years before she died. I'll tell you the name of what she had because I think it matters. Early onset Parkinson's disease, which at 36 years old was unusual enough that it took nearly 8 months and 3 different neurologists before anyone gave it a definite name. Those 8 months were the beginning of everything. Because during those 8 months, while Celeste was going from appointment to appointment, while she was logging her symptoms and researching and being terrified quietly in the way she always did everything, something was happening on the periphery of the family, that's Celeste, and I didn't fully register until much later. Daniel was getting interested. That's the word I keep coming back to. Interested. In a way he'd never really been interested in anything family-related before. He started calling our parents more. Started showing up to things. Our mother mentioned it to me on the phone with a tone of cautious hope, like she didn't want to jinx it. Danny's really been stepping up, she said. I remember being on my back porch when she said that, watching a bird on the fence and feeling something I couldn't quite identify. I didn't say anything negative. I said that was good. I meant to be glad about it. But the feeling was there, small and specific, like a stone in your shoe that you can walk on but can't stop noticing. Looking back, I think what I was feeling was recognition. I'd seen Daniel perform sincerity before. Before I go any further, I want to check in with you. I know some of you have been watching for a while, and I appreciate that. I genuinely do. If you're watching this in the middle of the night because you can't sleep, I see you. If you're watching this on a lunch break because you needed 10 minutes away from something difficult, I see you too. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it. Have you ever been in a room with someone who was performing an emotion and you knew it, but everyone around you seemed to believe it completely? That moment where you look around and realize you're the only one watching the same thing? Because that's what the next 2 years of my life felt like. I want you to keep that feeling in mind as I keep going. Celeste responded to her diagnosis the way she responded to most things. She got organized. She made lists. She found the best specialists, mapped out her options, and started making decisions about her life with this kind of clear-eyed pragmatism that I found both admirable and heartbreaking. One of those decisions was practical, financial. Celeste had been a careful saver her whole adult life. She owned her apartment outright, a small but beautiful 2-bedroom in the city where she worked. She had a retirement account, a savings account, and about 4 years' worth of living expenses set aside in a money market fund. For a 36-year-old, this was not an accident. This was Celeste. She also had life insurance, which she'd taken out when she bought the apartment. The policy was substantial. Not enormous, but substantial. And she had our grandmother's ring. This is important. I want to explain about the ring. Our grandmother on our mother's side, Grandma Vera, had been a woman of very few material things. She grew up poor, married a man who worked hard his whole life, raised 3 children in a small house, and never once behaved as though she deserved anything more than what she had. But she did have one thing of genuine value. A ring that her own mother had brought over from Poland. A simple thing by the standards of fine jewelry. A square-cut amethyst in a gold setting with small seed pearls around the stone. It wasn't worth a fortune in dollar terms, but in family terms it was the closest thing we had to an heirloom. When Grandma Vera died, she left the ring to Celeste. Not to my mother. Not to Daniel. Not to me. To Celeste specifically, because according to my mother, Grandma Vera had said that Celeste had her hands. The same hands. Patient hands, she'd said. Hands that knew how to hold something carefully. Celeste wore that ring every single day. I want you to hold on to that detail too. The ring. I'll come back to it. The first year after Celeste's diagnosis was hard, but manageable. Her symptoms progressed slowly. She kept working, adapted her practice, continued seeing her clients. She and I talked on the phone most nights, and she came to stay with me most weekends, and we developed this routine that I will honestly describe as one of the best periods of my adult life, even though it was built on top of something terrible. We watched bad movies. We cooked things we found on cooking shows and rated them on a scale of 1 to 10. We talked about everything, the way sisters talk when they stop pretending. We also talked about what she wanted. I'm not going to go into all of it because some of it belongs only to me. But I'll tell you the things that are relevant to what happened. Celeste was very clear about her wishes. She had a will. She'd had a lawyer help her update it after the diagnosis. She had a healthcare directive. She had written out, clearly and legally and with witnesses, what she wanted done and who she wanted making decisions if she couldn't make them herself. She had also, and this is the part that still makes the back of my neck tighten when I think about it, she had also noticed things about Daniel. He asked me about money a lot, she told me one night. We were sitting on my couch and she had a blanket over her legs, even though it wasn't cold. Her coordination had been getting worse. She kept her hands still when she didn't have to use them. I asked her what she meant. Just questions, she said. About the apartment. About what I'm doing with it. About whether I'm going to sell it. She paused. He asked me about Mom and Dad's last time he was here. I looked at her. That's not the same conversation, I said. I know, she said. That's what was weird about it. We sat with that for a minute. The television was on with the sound off. Some nature documentary, birds of some kind. I think he's doing the math, Celeste said quietly. I asked her what she meant. She looked at me with the expression she used when she was being careful with what she said. I think he's figured out that if something happens to me before Mom and Dad go, and if I haven't been specific enough about where things go, then it all funnels back through the family estate. And he's always going to get more from that than we are. I stared at the birds on the television. You should talk to your lawyer, I said. I already did, she said. Last week. That's who Celeste was. Ahead of it. Always ahead of it. Daniel started coming around more in the second year. More calls to our parents. More visits. He started framing himself as the responsible one, the one who was really showing up, and because he was physically there in a way that I sometimes couldn't be, because I had a job and my school had a specific and not very flexible calendar, he got to narrate himself that way. And my parents, who wanted to believe in him the way they always had, accepted that narration. I don't want to make my parents into villains. They were in their 70s, dealing with the impending loss of their youngest daughter, and their oldest child was there, present, attentive. In that context, it makes a painful kind of sense. You hold onto the appearance of family when the real thing is coming apart. But I started noticing things. Small things first. Celeste mentioned that Daniel had asked to borrow money twice in the space of 4 months. Not large amounts, but not small either. She'd said no both times. My mother mentioned that Daniel had asked about whether Celeste had a power of attorney and who held it. And once, just once, I arrived at Celeste's apartment on a Friday evening and found Daniel in the parking lot leaving. I hadn't known he was going to be there. Celeste hadn't mentioned it. I asked Celeste about it later, casually. She said he'd stopped by. She said he seemed fine, but she had her hands in her lap and she was looking at the window rather than at me, which was what Celeste did when she was deciding how much to say. I told her I was there if she wanted to tell me anything. She said she knew that. We watched a movie and it got late and I slept in her guest room, and in the morning we had coffee and she seemed like herself. But there was something at the edge of things. Something she was carrying that she wasn't putting down yet. I want to pause right here for a second. Are you watching from somewhere cold or somewhere warm? Because I'm imagining some of you are in completely different kinds of places right now. And that's one of the things I find genuinely interesting about telling this story. You're all coming to it from different directions. Here's what I want you to think about before I continue. Given what I've told you so far, what do you think Daniel was actually doing during those visits? I'll come back to that, but see if you can piece it together before I get there. Some of you are going to be right. Some of you are going to be more right than you want to be. Celeste died on a Tuesday in late October. Not suddenly, not without warning, but fast enough in the end that there were things unsaid and undone that I will carry for the rest of my life. She'd had a fall in September, a bad one, and she'd moved to a care facility that was clean and kind and staffed with people who clearly understood their job. I was there most weekends. My mother came when she could. My father came less often because being there hurt him in a way he couldn't manage. Daniel came twice. In the 6 weeks between the fall and her death. Twice. The second time was 3 days before she died. He came alone. He stayed for about an hour. Celeste was conscious but tired and not always tracking conversations perfectly, the way you are when the body is in its final work. I wasn't there that day. I was in the middle of a school week and I'd been trying to juggle my job and my trips to the facility, and I made a decision I'll regret for the rest of my life and stayed home. When I called Celeste that evening, her voice was thin. She said she was tired. She said, and I wrote this down afterward because I didn't want to forget it, Renata. The box under my bathroom sink. Okay, I didn't understand what she meant. I thought she was confused, slightly. I said okay, of course. She died 3 days later. Early morning. I wasn't there. My mother called me at 5:47 a.m., and I remember sitting on the edge of my bed with the phone in my hand for a long time before I could stand up. The funeral was 5 days later. I won't describe all of it because some of it is private and belongs to our family and to Celeste, and those parts aren't mine to put into this story. But I need to describe one part. Daniel at the graveside. He cried. Hard. The kind of crying that makes people around you reach out to touch your shoulder. The kind that draws attention. The kind that says to everyone watching, "This man is devastated." He had a handkerchief, which I remember thinking was strange because nobody carries handkerchiefs anymore, and he pressed it to his face and his shoulders shook, and he made a low, rough sound that several people later described to me as the most heartbreaking thing they'd heard. My Aunt Shirley put her arm around him. My mother reached for his hand. My father, who hadn't cried at all, looked at Daniel and something in his expression softened. And I stood there, watching, and that cold thing happened in my chest. That quiet, specific cold. Because I was watching my brother's performance, and I was looking at it the way I'd learned to look at things over 41 years of being on the periphery of this family. And what I saw wasn't grief. His eyes were dry. Not wet and then dried. Dry. The shoulders were moving, the sounds were right, the posture was correct. But his eyes, when the handkerchief came away from his face, were completely, entirely dry. I looked around at the people around him. Nobody else was looking at his eyes. I filed that away. After the graveside, after the gathering at my parents' house where people ate casseroles brought by neighbors and said all the things people say, after my mother fell asleep on the couch and my father retreated to his study, I went to Celeste's apartment. I had a key. I'd always had a key. I stood in her apartment for a long time without turning on the lights. It smelled like her coffee, her lotion, that particular paper smell of someone who reads constantly. I walked slowly through the rooms the way you do when you're memorizing something you're about to lose. And then I went to the bathroom. The box under the bathroom sink. I hadn't forgotten what she'd said. I'd been carrying it through 5 days of arrangements and phone calls and logistics and grief. Carrying it the way you carry a key to a door you're not sure you're ready to open. There was a box under the sink. A plastic storage box, the kind you'd keep cleaning supplies in. Under the cleaning supplies, inside a freezer bag, was a manila envelope with my name on it. Inside the envelope was a letter, written in Celeste's handwriting, 8 pages long, and several other things. I sat down on the bathroom floor with the lights on and read every word. I'm not going to tell you everything that was in that letter yet. I know that might be frustrating, but I need you to understand something first. I need you to understand what it felt like to sit on a cold bathroom floor the night of your sister's funeral and read something that made the last 2 years of your life rearrange themselves into a completely different shape. It's disorienting in a specific way, like watching a photograph develop and realizing the image isn't what you thought it was. Some of you have experienced something like this. The moment when evidence reorganizes reality, when you understand that what you were seeing was not what was happening. I read that letter twice before I stood up, and then I did something that surprised me. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text. I didn't drive to my parents' house. I went to Celeste's kitchen. I made a cup of tea in a mug that said something about Mondays because it was the first one I found, and I sat at her kitchen table and I thought. Just thought. For almost 2 hours, I sat in my dead sister's kitchen and I thought. I should tell you about Celeste's apartment manager. His name was Roy. He was about 60, wore the same canvas jacket every time I saw him, and had the disposition of someone who had seen enough human behavior to no longer be surprised by any of it. He'd managed the building for 11 years. He knew all his tenants by name and by habit. He knew Celeste well, because Celeste was the kind of tenant building managers liked. She paid on time, she was considerate of neighbors, and she occasionally brought cookies to the office during the holidays. When Celeste's health had declined, Roy had quietly installed a security camera in the hallway outside her apartment at his own initiative, without anyone asking him to. He told me this later. He said he didn't like the idea of her being vulnerable, and he wanted there to be a record if anything ever went wrong. He hadn't told Celeste. He'd wanted to but felt awkward about it. He told me about the camera 3 days after the funeral. He called me on my cell phone, which I found strange because I didn't think he had my number, and I asked him how he got it. He said Celeste had given it to him months before she died and told him to call me if he ever thought something needed my attention. He said he thought something needed my attention. We met at the building the following morning. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you the next part, because it isn't a single dramatic moment. It's more like a sequence of small things that assembled themselves into something large and terrible. The way a photograph comes into focus slowly rather than all at once. Roy showed me the footage on a laptop in his office, which smelled like old coffee and had a map of the building's utility routes tacked to the wall. He fast-forwarded through days of hallway footage, almost apologetically, like he wasn't sure he was doing the right thing and was checking my face to see. I watched the screen. I watched my brother come and go. Not twice. Not the 2 times his visits were acknowledged and known about. 11 times. In the 6 weeks between Celeste's fall and her death, Daniel came to her apartment 11 times. Several of those visits were while Celeste was at the care facility. Let me let that sit for just a second, because I want you to really absorb what I'm telling you. My brother was letting himself into my sister's apartment while she was in a care facility dying. He had a key. I don't know exactly when or how he'd gotten it, but he had one, because the footage showed him using a key each time, not picking the lock, not breaking anything, just walking in as though he belonged there. Roy had a log of the entry times. He'd written them down in a small notebook with a blue cover. I looked at the dates. The last visit was 2 days before Celeste died. The day after he'd come to see her at the facility. He'd gone to see her at the care facility, spent an hour with her while she was barely conscious, and the following day he'd gone to her apartment. I need to tell you something about myself, so you understand what I did next. I am not by nature a confrontational person. I'm an art teacher. I like quiet. I like things that develop slowly and reveal themselves at the edge of your vision. I am someone who, for most of my life, absorbed things rather than challenged them. I had spent decades being the sister who understood what was happening and said nothing, who watched the architecture of the family and noted its problems and lived with them, because the alternative felt too costly. Celeste had been the same way, mostly, until she wasn't. That 8-page letter was the most direct thing I had ever read that she had written. She had documented everything. Dates, conversations, amounts, observations. She wrote with the same methodical clarity she used with her clients, assessing what was broken and what it needed. She had begun keeping records months before she died. She wrote because she had started to feel afraid. Not of dying, of what might happen after. She wrote about the questions Daniel had asked. She wrote about a conversation where he had suggested that since she wasn't using her apartment, maybe it made sense for him to take it over while she was at the facility. She wrote about finding that her spare key was missing from the drawer where she kept it, and then 3 days later it was back and she hadn't been there. She wrote about our grandmother's ring. She had noticed, she wrote, when she came home for a short visit between the fall and moving fully into the care facility, that the ring was not where she kept it. She hadn't been sure at first. Her mind had been scattered, she wrote. She'd told herself she'd misplaced it, but she'd looked everywhere, and it wasn't there. She wrote, I think I know what happened to it, but I can't prove it. Renata, I need you to look. I need someone who was always watching to look at this. I sat on my sister's bathroom floor and read those words. I think I know what happened to it. I need someone who was always watching. I want to stop here for just a moment because I think this is where some of you are going to start feeling the thing I felt on that bathroom floor. That combination of grief and clarity that is somehow worse than grief alone. Because clarity means you have to decide what to do with what you know. What time is it where you are right now? I'm asking because I want you to know that wherever you are, whatever time it is, I hear you in this moment. Because some of you are going to recognize something in what I'm telling you. Some version of this in your own lives. The family member who performed. The thing that was wrong that everyone agreed to look away from. I don't know your specific story, but I think you know the shape of it. Take a breath. Stay with me. I didn't confront Daniel that week, or the week after. I want to explain why, because I think some people in my life thought I was avoiding it, or that I was in denial, or that I was paralyzed by grief. None of those were true. I was doing what Celeste asked me to do. She had written clearly, don't go to him first. Don't go to Mom and Dad first. Go to Marcus. Marcus was Celeste's lawyer. I called Marcus the morning after I read the letter. He already knew I was going to call. Celeste had told him to expect it. She'd given him his own copy of much of what she'd given me, in a sealed envelope with his name on it, delivered to his office 6 weeks before she died. His voice on the phone was professionally careful in a way that told me he had been waiting and had been preparing and was not going to say more than was necessary until we were sitting in the same room. I made an appointment for that Friday. Between the phone call and the appointment, I went back to Roy. I asked him if I could have copies of the footage. He said he'd already made them. He'd made them the day after Celeste died and kept them in his safe. He handed me a thumb drive in a small paper envelope. He said she was a good person. I figured someone should do right by her. I thanked him. He nodded and looked at the wall and didn't say anything else. Marcus's office was on the 3rd floor of a building downtown, the kind of old downtown building with an elevator that made sounds you weren't entirely comfortable with. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s, with the kind of stillness I associate with people who spend a lot of time listening to difficult things. He handed me a cup of water before we sat down. He put a folder on the desk between us. He said, "Your sister was methodical. I want you to know that what she did here in terms of documentation and legal preparation was not something most people think to do. She knew exactly what she was trying to create a record for." I asked him what we were dealing with. He opened the folder. What he showed me was a picture assembled from multiple directions. The will, which was updated and clean and unambiguous. The financial accounts, which were in order with beneficiaries clearly designated. And then a secondary set of documents that Celeste had been quietly building over the past year. Bank statements with certain withdrawals circled in red pen. A notarized record of the ring and its appraised value and the photographs she'd taken of it over the years, the most recent dated 8 months before her death, and a document I hadn't known existed. A temporary loan agreement signed by Daniel for $60,000. I looked at Marcus. He met my eyes. "Your sister lent your brother $60,000, he said, about 14 months ago. He signed a repayment agreement. She kept the original." He paused. "No payments have been made." I looked at the signature. Daniel's handwriting. Unmistakable. I'd seen it my whole life. "She didn't tell you," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "She told me," he said, "that she didn't want to put you in the middle of it while she was sick. She said you had enough to carry. She said she'd waited too long to tell you, and that by the time she realized how serious it had become, it felt too late for a conversation." He paused. "But she made sure it was documented, and she made sure you'd find it." I looked at the signed agreement on the desk. I thought about my brother's dry eyes at the graveside. I thought about the handkerchief. I thought about Celeste saying, "I think I know what happened to it, but I can't prove it. Renata, I need you to look." I'm going to slow down here deliberately, because I think there's a temptation in stories like this to jump to the confrontation, to skip over the middle part where the person who's been wronged has to figure out how to carry what they know without it destroying them first. And I don't want to skip that part, because that part is real and it matters. Between my meeting with Marcus and the moment I sat across from my brother, there were 3 weeks. 3 weeks where I went to work and taught 12-year-olds how to mix colors and understand negative space. 3 weeks where I called my mother and listened to her talk about how hard things were and said the right things in response. 3 weeks where I saw Daniel at a family dinner, a birthday dinner for my father, and I sat across from him and passed him the bread and asked him how work was and watched him answer like a person who had nothing to hide. He was good. He was genuinely good. And I thought about the performance at the graveside, the handkerchief, the shoulders, the sound. I ate my dinner. I passed the bread. I smiled at my father's birthday cake. And I waited. Part of waiting was doing what Celeste asked. She had written specific things in the letter about what she wanted. Not revenge, she wrote. She'd underlined that. Not revenge. Accountability. She wrote those words like someone who had thought carefully about the difference. She wanted the loan repaid to the estate. She wanted the ring found and returned if possible. She wanted our parents to know the truth. Gently, she wrote, as gently as it can be told, because they'll need to decide for themselves what to do with it. But they deserve to know. And she wrote, I don't want this to eat you, Renata. I know how you carry things. I know you'll want to hold all of this and protect everyone and manage it and make it neat and clean. Don't. Let Marcus help you. Let it be what it is. I read that paragraph a lot during those 3 weeks. Let it be what it is. The thing about secrets inside a family is that they have weight. Real physical weight. You feel it in your body, in the tightening between your shoulder blades, in the way your jaw aches when you wake up in the morning. I want to ask you something. Have you ever known something about someone that you couldn't yet say out loud? Not because you weren't sure of it, but because saying it would change everything, and changing everything is its own kind of loss, even when the change is necessary. That's what those 3 weeks were. I was carrying the shape of what I knew and the shape of what I was going to have to do with it. And both of those things were heavy in different ways. My therapist at the time, a woman named Dr. Fenn, who wore bright-colored scarves and had a very direct manner I appreciated, said something to me in that period that I've thought about ever since. She said, there are people in families who perform the role of grieving, and then there are people who actually grieve. The performing ones are usually the ones who had something to protect. The grieving ones are usually the ones who had something to lose. I thought about Daniel's dry eyes. I thought about Celeste's laugh, the one that surprised her halfway through. I went home that night and I grieved. Really grieved. The kind that sounds ugly and feels necessary. And then I called Marcus and told him I was ready. We had already established, Marcus and I, what the first step would be. Not a confrontation. A letter. Marcus had drafted it and I had reviewed it, and it was surgical in the way legal documents can be surgical, precise, and specific, and leaving no room for interpretation. It laid out the documented loan. It referenced the signed agreement. It specified the amount owed to the estate. It asked for a response within 14 days. It did not mention the footage yet. It did not mention the ring yet. It was the first step in a sequence, and its purpose was not to resolve anything. Its purpose was to see how Daniel responded. Because what someone does when they receive a document like that, before they know the full extent of what you know, tells you a great deal about them. Marcus sent the letter on a Thursday. By that Saturday morning, Daniel had already called our father. I know this because our father called me. His voice measured, but with an edge I hadn't heard in a long time. He said Daniel had called him upset. He said Daniel was saying that I had sent him some kind of legal document about Celeste's estate, and it was cruel and inappropriate, and I was using grief as an excuse to attack him. I let my father finish. Then I said, Dad, I want to come see you and Mom. Both of you together. I have some things I need to show you. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, okay. My parents' living room. The same room I'd sat in 1,000 times. The same couch with the navy blue cushions. The same lamp on the side table that had been there since I was a child. The photographs on the wall in their matching frames. The same ones that had always been there, which meant Celeste was on that wall, smiling. a photograph from her college graduation. I sat across from my parents and I placed a folder on the coffee table and I told them I needed them to let me get all the way through before they responded. My mother's hands were in her lap. My father's jaw was set. I started talking. I told them about the letter Celeste had left me. I told them about Marcus and what he'd found. I described the loan, the signed agreement, the missed payments. I described what Roy had shown me, the footage, the 11 visits, the timeline. I described what Celeste had written about the ring. I described my brother's visits to the care facility and the apartment. I didn't rush. I had decided not to rush. This was the most important thing I would ever say to my parents, and I wanted every word to land clearly. My father didn't move. My mother made a sound at the part about the ring. A small sound, barely audible. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. When I finished, I closed the folder. I looked at my parents, and in that silence, I understood something I hadn't quite understood before. Something about what it costs a parent to believe that one of their children could do this. It's not a simple cost. It's the cost of revising everything. Every memory where you trusted him. Every time you believed his version. Every time you chose his account of things over someone else's. My mother's eyes were full. My father was looking at the floor. The handkerchief, he said very quietly. I looked at him. He said it again, almost to himself. He had a handkerchief. He looked up at me. Your brother doesn't carry a handkerchief. He never has. He'd noticed too. He'd noticed, filed it away, and until this moment had not let himself know what he was noticing. I want to stop here. Not because the story is over. It isn't over. Not even close. But because this moment right here, my father's voice saying the handkerchief, this is the moment I come back to when I think about what happened. The thing about someone who performs is that there are always small mistakes. Always small technical failures in the performance. A handkerchief carried by someone who's never carried one. Shoulders moving without eyes wet. The wrong kind of urgency in the wrong kind of conversation. Small things that the observant people in the room file away without knowing yet what they're filing. I had been filing things my entire life. Celeste had been filing things her entire life. We just hadn't known until now that we'd been building the same case. My father asked me what happened next. I told him Marcus was already working on the estate. The loan had legal standing. There were remedies available. I told him we weren't going to handle this ourselves. That's what lawyers were for. He nodded. He looked at the photograph of Celeste on the wall. My mother finally spoke. She asked about the ring. I told her we didn't know for certain yet. I told her there were options we were looking into. She nodded slowly. She said she wore it every day. Every single day. I never once saw her without it. I know, Mom. I know. She had Vera's hands, my mother said. Her voice was very quiet. That's why Vera left it to her. Because she recognized them. We sat there for a long time without speaking. The lamp on the side table cast the same light it always had. The photographs on the wall were the same photographs they'd always been. But the room felt different now. The architecture of it had shifted. Not broken, not destroyed. Just rearranged into something closer to true. Daniel called me the following Tuesday. I had been expecting the call. Marcus had advised me on what to say and what not to say, and I had agreed with his approach. I was to be cordial, to not accuse, to not reveal the full extent of what I knew, to let him believe the letter was the whole of it. He was angry initially, controlled angry, the kind that's been rehearsed into a performance of wounded dignity. He said it was inappropriate. He said it was hurtful. He said he didn't know what I thought I was doing, going behind the family's back with lawyers, treating him like a criminal when all he had done was try to help Celeste during the hardest time of her life. I listened. I said, "Daniel, Marcus is handling the estate. If you have questions, you should direct them to him." He said he thought this was between family. I said some of it is. Some of it is legal. That's how estates work. He paused. In the pause, I heard him recalibrate. "I loved her," he said. And his voice did something then, a catch, a thickening. I thought about the dry eyes. I thought about the handkerchief. I said, "I know you did." Because I knew how to be careful too. In the weeks that followed, things developed the way things develop when lawyers are involved and documentation is solid. I'm not going to walk you through the legal details because honestly they were complicated and dry, and the specific mechanisms matter less than the outcome. What I'll tell you is what Marcus told me, that Celeste had been thorough, that the documentation she'd left was, in his words, unusual in its completeness, that she had built something that was, from a legal standpoint, quite clear. I'll also tell you something Marcus said that I've thought about ever since. He said, "Your sister understood that she might not be there to advocate for herself, so she made sure the record would do it for her. She made sure the record would do it for her." I think about that every time I walk past Whistler, my cat, who was actually originally Celeste's cat and who came to live with me after she moved into the care facility. He's an orange tabby with a deeply judgmental face, and he sleeps on the exact center of the bed, no matter how many times I move him. Celeste named him Whistler because she said he walked through rooms like he owned the walls. She said she admired that about him. She admired it in him the same way she admired it in people who move through the world without apologizing for taking up space. Celeste had spent a lot of her life apologizing for things that weren't her fault. I think she decided when she understood how sick she was that she was done with that. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with my mother about 2 months after that afternoon in the living room. It was an evening. We were at her kitchen table, which is a small table in a kitchen that smells like the same dish soap it has always smelled like. And my mother had made tea, and we were sitting with our cups and not talking the way you can sit with someone when the silence is safe. My mother said, "Do you think I knew?" I looked at her. She said, not consciously, "But do you think some part of me knew and I chose not to look?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. I said, "I think we all have things we choose not to look at when looking would cost us too much." She nodded slowly. She said, "I think I made it easier for him by always believing his version of things, by always giving him the room to explain. I think I made it easier for him to become someone who expected that to work." I looked at the steam rising from my tea. I said, "Celeste didn't blame you." She said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because she wrote it down. In the letter, she specifically wrote, 'Don't let Mom blame herself.' She wrote that you loved all of us the best way you knew how." My mother put her cup down. She looked at the table. After a while, she said, "I'm going to be looking for the rest of my life at what I should have seen." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. I said, "I think that's what love costs us sometimes. Looking." She didn't say anything else. Neither did I. We sat in the kitchen and drank our tea, and outside the window the evening came in slowly, the way evening does in October, turning everything a quiet gray. I need to tell you about the ring, because I promised I'd come back to it, and because of what finding it actually meant. 3.5 months after Celeste's funeral, Marcus received a communication from Daniel's attorney suggesting that a resolution of the loan matter might be possible and that his client was open to discussions. This was, as Marcus explained to me with careful neutralness, a shift. Prior to this, Daniel had maintained that the loan was informal, misremembered, a misunderstanding of an arrangement that had been verbal and different in character from how it appeared on paper. This was the position despite the signed agreement, despite Celeste's documentation, despite everything. The shift happened, Marcus believed, because of something he had done the previous week. He had sent a second letter. This one mentioned the security footage. It did not detail the footage specifically. It simply informed Daniel's attorney that the estate possessed security documentation relevant to the property and assets in question, and that this documentation was being preserved and had been reviewed. That was all it said. 3 days later, Daniel's attorney called. There are moments in a long, difficult process where you feel the things shift. Not the resolution, not the ending, but the shift. The moment where what was hidden begins to surface. I was at school when Marcus called. I was in the middle of explaining to a student why the background of a painting is not just empty space, but a decision. I stepped into the hallway to take the call. Marcus said he wants to settle. I stood in the hallway with my hand against the wall. I said, "What does that mean exactly?" Marcus said, "It means he's acknowledged the loan in writing through his attorney. It means he's agreed in principle to full repayment to the estate." I looked down the hall. 2 kids were at their lockers arguing about something ordinary. I said, "And the ring?" Marcus paused. He said, his attorney indicated that certain personal items of the deceased may have been taken into his possession for, quote, safekeeping, and that these could be made available. I pressed my hand flat against the wall. Safekeeping. The word sat in my chest like something cold. Safekeeping. My sister's body still warm, and the ring on its way to safekeeping. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "I want it back in my mother's hands, Marcus. That's what this is about." He said, "I understand. We'll make that happen. I want to slow way down here. Because I know that some of you want the room. The confrontation. The moment where everything is said out loud. And I need you to trust me when I tell you that what I'm about to describe is more complicated than a confrontation. It's more uncomfortable, and it's more true. Because the moment the ring came back, it wasn't through a dramatic scene in someone's living room. It was through a lawyer's office, a transfer of items, a form signed, a box brought by a courier. My mother opened the box at the kitchen table. The ring was inside, wrapped in tissue paper. My mother looked at it for a long time without picking it up. Then she picked it up. She turned it in the light, and the amethyst caught it and held it. She said, very quietly, "There you are." Like she was talking to Vera. Like she was talking to Celeste. Like the ring was carrying something of both of them back into the room. She put it on her finger where it fit imperfectly but stayed. She looked at me, and I saw in her face something I hadn't seen through all of this. Not grief, not anger, not even relief, exactly. I saw her deciding something. Here's the thing I want you to sit with. I've been telling you a story about betrayal and documentation and legal remedies and security footage and the slow, careful work of accountability. And all of those things are true. All of those things happened. But underneath all of it, what this story is really about is something Celeste wrote in her letter that I've saved for now. The last paragraph of the 8 pages. The part she clearly spent the most time on because the handwriting is different there, slower, more deliberate. She wrote, "What I want you to understand, Renata, is that I am not angry. I was for a while. I was very angry. But here is what I have come to believe. Lying here thinking about things I didn't let myself think about before. The people who take from others because they can are not taking because they have too much want. they're taking because they are empty in a way that can never be filled. Danny is the most afraid person I have ever known. He has been afraid his entire life. He was afraid even when mom and dad gave him everything. Maybe especially then, because everything was never going to be enough to fill the emptiness. I'm not saying forgive him. I'm not saying pretend. I'm saying understand. And then do what you need to do anyway. Do it because I made a record and I trusted you to find it, and I trusted you because you were always the one who was watching. You saw the things nobody else saw. You always saw them. I'm counting on you to keep seeing clearly. All my love always and into whatever comes next. Celeste.